Hey people, about to do the front rotors and pads. This is a 2016 Ford Everest. This is very similar to the Rangers and the BT50s. First thing is you obviously want to get the car jacked up, and we'll get this wheel off. With the nuts out of the way, we can get the wheel out of the way. Just going to turn the steering wheel just to have this rotate around this way a little bit. Just means I can get to these bolts a little bit easier, and it's easier to show you on camera. With this now turned, you can see the two 15mm bolts that secure the caliper here to the guide pins. We're going to zip these two off. Sometimes this will rotate in here. You can hold it just with a shifter, because it's not really a bolt, it's more like just a squared off section, or a 21mm spanner will also hold it. I'm hoping that I'm not really going to need to hold it. We can just zip them straight out. If we can see on the bottom here as I try and do it, it just spins. So we'll just hold it in place and get the bolt out. With those bolts now removed, you can grab the caliper and slide it off the brakes. Now these do sit fairly nicely up here, but I don't want it to fall. So just a bit of wire and just secure it off to the side somewhere. Just so it's not going to fall and become a problem. Now we can pull the pads out. Okay, these are starting to get low. Certainly still quite okay for a little while. You can see the wear indicator here. We're not anywhere near that wear indicator yet, but we're replacing them anyway. Now, depending what model and year you have, this shape does vary a little bit. I believe the two-wheel drive and the four-wheel drives have a slightly different shape. Some have these little clips on them, some don't. So make sure you get the ones that suit your particular model. Now, just looking right in on the back here, we can see that there's two bolts. They're an 18mm bolt. They secure this bracket in place here. We're going to undo those two bolts. Move that up and out of the way. To the two bolts that come out there. Then this bracket here can come out of the way. Next thing I want to do is remove this rotor. There's no little screws that are securing this in place. It's literally just sitting there. So we're going to give it a good hit with a hammer and see if we can knock it off. Just going to run a nut on here, just so it doesn't go flying when I hit it. It actually came off a little bit easier than I expected. Sometimes they need a fair bit of work to get them off. Now, before I put the new one on, I want to just clean up this surface a little bit. We've just got a little bit of surface rust in here. Depending how much beach work and off-road work you've done, sometimes these can be quite corroded. We just want a nice clean surface for when we put the new rotor in place. So just get in with the wire brush, just try and clean it all up. Going to use a little bit of brake clean as well, just to give it a bit of a squirt down. Next thing I want to do is look at compressing these pistons back in place. Before I do that, I'm just going to make sure that these boots aren't torn or damaged, that there's no fluid leaking. You can kind of pop these out a little bit and just make sure it's dry inside and there's no leaking at all. But I just want to clean the dirt and mud off before I compress them back in. Just give them a good spray with some brake clean, and then a cloth or a little brush, and just try and tidy up those rubbers. Now you're going to need a brake sort of wind back tool or something that can compress these. You could put a vise on both of these and compress them. I'm just going to use this wind back tool here. Set a pad in place and just wind it in. Be careful not to just wind one in only, because it can actually pop the other one out. And as I'm winding in, I'm just making sure that I'm winding it in evenly. Swap to the other side a little bit. Just be careful too while you're winding these back. Sometimes the brake fluid reservoir under the bonnet can be filled right up. So as we push this back in, it'll force some fluid back and can overflow that reservoir. So just make sure that it hasn't been overfilled at any point, and just watch the level as you wind this back. We can see those pistons are dropping right back in. Make sure on this side as well that they're fully in. And that's how those pistons sit once they're fully in, nice and flat. And that's why we're cleaning that rubber up, because you just don't want all that dirt trapped in there. Now we can grab the new disc. I'm using a Ford Motorcraft brand. Before I put the disc back on, I just want to give it a good squirt off on the inside, get off any oil or grease that's on it from packing. Just going to run a nut on here just to keep it in place. And we'll just give it another squirt off just to get rid of my dirty fingerprints. Now before I put this bracket back in place, I just want to clean up this hardware that's sitting on here. You can buy new hardware if it's damaged in any way. You can also get all new rubbers and slide pins should you need to. These are still moving, but we'll clean them in a moment. I just want to clean up these first. It's a little bit of a wire brush. You can just give them a good rub. Just be careful of the brake dust. You don't want to be breathing that in. A little bit of brake clean's always a good option. Just want to get them nice and clean again. If you have a look, you can see that they're always coming up shiny, but there's no damage on those. They're just sitting there. You can pull them off to clean them, but I find it easier just to clean them on the bracket. Just be careful if you do knock these out of the way that you put them back in the right spot and they're located well. And depending on your particular model, they may all look a little bit different. Next thing I'm going to do is just pop out this pin. Just with a rag you can clean off any excess grease, any old grease. The pin should be in good condition. It shouldn't be all rusted up or pitted or anything like that. So this one here is looking quite fine. Let's pop the second one off. Okay, and this one's looking a little bit dirtier, but again, I'm not seeing any problems here. Just looking in there, I can see that it's all fresh and clean in there. There's no corrosion, no water has entered in there, caused any issues, so that's good news. Okay, I want to grease up these pins now. I like using these single-use satchels. That way you can't kind of put too much on, and also that's nice and easy to clean up with. Often you'll get them in the brake pads themselves, or for a couple of dollars you can just buy them from the shop. Just squeeze some of that out onto the pin. Now you don't want to put a big clump of it on the end, because as it goes back in there, it can kind of get stuck and try and compress the grease in the end. So just put a nice smear on it, not too much. And we'll pop that back in. Just check that, and that's just sliding nicely. Just clean up that little bit of grease on the outside there. On the next pin, now because mine was clean already down in here, I didn't feel the need to clean it all out, but should yours be getting bound up or anything, you might need to clean it all in here and pull the boot off and try and get any old grease out. Mine was pretty good, so I didn't need to worry about that. So I'm happy that they're not in any way bound up or sticking. Next, I just want to get these bolts ready for reassembly. These are the two bolts that secure that bracket in place. Just going to put a drop of blue thread locker on both of them. Then we can position this back in place. Run the bolt in. Now with those two bolts done up, perfect time to give your hands a wash or put a new set of gloves on, just because you don't want to put grease and dirt on your new pads or on the rotor. Just have a look at the new pads you're putting on. One of them usually has a wear indicator. That one will sit at the rear. You can also see they're a little bit different with these lugs on here. Different brake pads, different designs, different years, so just make sure you have the right one for your car. So this may not be the same for all models, but this particular one had some clips here, so just going to slip those in place. Just sit there like that. So with the clips back in place on mine, it's just a matter of fitting it back in here. Again, depending on the shape of yours and what clips, will depend how it best sits in place. Now before I go and sit it in place, I'm just making sure that these are still sitting firmly on the bracket. We'll come up here with the pad. And sit that in place. Then the rear one. Don't be that guy that puts them on backwards. Make sure the material is actually facing the rotor itself. So they're sitting in there nicely. I'm just going to put a little bit of Loctite on the slide pin bolts. You can see there's some remnants of the old Loctite there. So I'll just put it in the same sort of spot. Now we'll grab the caliper, get it off the little piece of wire. Just make sure that we don't have any twists in this brake hose. We'll just slide it in place. You may have to push those pins in just for it to locate. And we'll grab the bolt and run the bolt in. and just run the bottom one in. Now these bolts get tightened up to 30 Newton meters. You may have to, like I said before, hold this, but we'll see how we go. Is that one done? And the bottom one. Make sure you take the wire away that you've had to support the caliper. I'm going to now turn the wheels straight ahead again, just so this wheel's easier to put back in place. Now I just want to make a quick note. A lot of people put this grease on these points here, points of contact. Also these points of contact on the back of the pad here as well. I prefer not to do that. I just find it can get quite messy. It does sometimes prevent squealing of the brakes, but usually if your brakes are squealing, there's some other problem going on. So look, it's up to you whether that's something that you really need to do or want to do. I prefer not to, and I'm just going to leave that argument there. Now the next thing I'm going to do before I put the wheel back on is just give this surface in here a good clean as well. I like to keep it fairly wet while I'm doing it, just to avoid any dust. But just a quick wire brush on this will just remove anything that's loose. Make sure we take our nut off. Now I'm just going to zip them up with a impact. Okay, I've just lowered the car now back down onto the ground. I'm just going to torque up these wheel nuts. They get torqued up to 135 Newton meters. We'll just go in a bit of a crisscross pattern. Now because it's actually tightening up against a new disc, I will actually do a couple passes of that just so I know that it has settled itself correctly. Now, quick word of warning here. When you first hop in the car and you press that brake pedal, you're going to get a lot of travel, and it may even go right down near the floor. It may take 1 or 2 pumps before that brake pedal is at its correct height, and that's just because it's closing that gap where those pistons in the caliper will press right back. It now needs to come in and make contact obviously with the pads and the new rotor. So it may take a couple of pumps. Don't start driving the car until you feel that you've got a nice firm brake pedal. Also, when you take it out for a test drive, make sure the brakes are performing correctly, and also follow any instructions on the brake pads regarding bedding them in or their first use. Okay, so I've just taken the car for a bit of a drive. There's no weird noises. The brakes are operating nice and smooth. They're pulling the car up in a nice straight line, nice and even. I can feel a fair bit of heat coming off these, and they do have a bit of a smell as well. So all of those things are to be expected when you first use it. Hey, any comments, questions, concerns, make sure you leave them below. Make sure you check out some of my other videos, and thanks for watching.